think of stalling.
Is there something to like?
Sorry about that. My little brother entered the room. Yeah, so just a little bit about me. I'm like a career judge. I have broken at two UADCs and one APP, and I have like too many judge breaks. Um, I think that's really all when it comes to who I am. Uh, I also organize some tournaments, such as Serious IV, but not most of you will not be going there because it is the same weekend as People Speak, so that's fine. Um, okay, I think this should be enough stalling. Is OC starting the
Yes.
recording now?
Yes, we're good to
Okay,
go.
perfect. Okay, let's get on to the actual part of the workshop that you were waiting for, which is of course the actual workshop itself. Yay! Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. I hope it is visible to everyone. I'm going to present full screen. Yeah, so I hope this is visible to everyone. I can see it on my end. I hope other people can see it too.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, great. So, yeah, welcome to panel management and contributing as a wing. Um, I'll try to keep this wrapped up at so right now it's 7:17 p.m. Um, 7:17 plus 1:30 should be like let's try to finish it at least 9 maybe. Maybe we can have some room for Q&A afterwards, hopefully if people are free at the time. Cool. So panel management and contributing as a wing presented by yours me. Okay. So before we get on to judging, decide like going on to the essence of the workshop, there are just some key terms I kind of want you guys to get. If there might be other terms which you may not know yet, you may not understand. If I feel like there are other terms that I missed here, I'll just like kind of explain them as I go along. So a wing is basically just another way of saying the panel. So wing and panel is the same. And by panel, I don't mean the panelist. I mean the group of judges who are like judging alongside the chair, who are not the chair. So a wing refers to the panelist and the trainee. So wing and panel is effectively kind of the same thing. Consensus deliberation, very important. This is everything that British parliamentary judging is all about in terms of the 15 minutes that you have in deliberating with the other judge, where the main intention is to share thoughts and attempts to kind of persuade each other on what the correct call of the round should be. So it is mostly a process of collaborating, sharing notes, and kind of, I guess you could say, debating with other judges on why your call is correct. If you have judged BP, you should have already known that this is basically how most BP is like. Thirdly, contribution. Contribution is a very broad term. It's probably something you should hear in debating a lot. In judging, it is also something that's important. So, a contribution of a judge is basically, in essence, how productive you're able to be within a discussion, within a deliberation. It could reflect things like the quality of your justification, the insights and questions you ask within the deliberation, and the attempts that you make that overall evolve the deliberation to be able to reach a far more accurate call. All of this is just to say that regardless of not whether you are a chair, a panelist, or a trainee, your contribution is basically good things that add on to the OA that make it a far more productive discussion. So basically, the whole gist of this workshop is focusing on the contribution part. That is to say, how are you able to improve your contribution towards the specific deliberation that is happening at hand? Okay, so prologue. This workshop assumes you have basic prior knowledge in the following skills or the following like knowledges. The first is that this workshop assumes that you already know what the British parliamentary debating format is. If you don't know what BP debating format is, I highly suggest that you make a quick Google search while you are looking at this workshop, because this workshop assumes that you already know that BP is a four-team format with a closing and an opening and all the other stuff there. Um, yeah, so you basically should know this. The second prior knowledge that I hope you guys have prior to this is that you already have basic understanding on how to judge a BP debate. Because this is not a workshop on the introduction of how to judge, because that kind of, I'm already kind of assuming you have that baseline skill. So you can kind of consider this like a inter intermediate-ish judging workshop, or like a post-beginner judging workshop, where it's not meant to introduce you to what the concept of judging, but it's meant to enhance your skill after you already have a basic understanding of how to judge. And of course, this can just be the bare minimum. You don't have to, if you have absolutely zero judging tournament, as long as you know how judging BP debate goes, you know, like there is the art of tracking the debate. You have to track the four teams in deliberation. You explain your call. You already know all these things, etc. That is basically what I mean by the basic understanding, which I hope you guys have. If you don't have that, yes, Jagrita, what's the question? Okay, I'm gonna assume that was a mistake, or maybe someone typed in the chat. No, okay. I didn't hear anyone. I don't think anyone unmuted, so I'm gonna keep going. Yeah, so that's basically the second part that I assume you guys already know. If you don't know how to judge a BP debate, you can still go to this workshop. It's just that it helps to know. It helps that if you it or it helps if you already know what BP judging is. Like what the essence of BP judging is. The third and kind of the least necessary step, but also another step that is important, is that you have at least skimmed through the World's University Debating Championship 2025 Judging Manual, specifically the latest edition from Panama Worlds 2025, because that manual is basically a guidebook on understanding basic principles of judging, such as the idea of the average reasonable voter, things like the importance of doing pairwise comparisons, etc. Um, I will probably link a link to the Panama WDC Manual 2025 after the workshop. I highly encourage, if you do want to become a better judge, to read that workshop. I have found myself improve as a judge when I started out judging just by kind of looking through the manual and like trying to understand it like if it was my Bible. Um, I am Muslim, by the way. The Bible thing is just okay. I guess a better way of saying it is I have read the world's manual like if it was the Quran. Cool. So that's the prologue. I hope you already have prior knowledge. If you don't, it's fine. It just helps that you have some basic understanding. If you're just a trainee and this is your first time ever judging, you have no idea what's going on. This workshop is still going to help you in some regard because I will still keep it relevant towards just the core baseline of what you should do during deliberation. Okay, so some additional, I guess, clarification. What else is this workshop not going to be about? Obviously, since I've illustrated that it's not going to be a beginner workshop, a lot of this will not really have to do with improving the quality of your justification. Um, yes, you will find content that like is me teaching you guys how to format your justifications better, how to justify within deliberation, which I guess is interlinked to the quality of justification. But there are other workshops which go into massive detail on just broadly the art of like just giving a good OA, or the art of just justifying better. Pranav, who is also a cap of People Speak, has an entire workshop on mastering the art of OAs. That one is for Asian parliamentary, but that one is still very relevant if you just want to become a better judge as a whole. There are also a whole host of other judging workshops, which I will link in the workshop later, that mostly focus on how to become a better judge in terms of how you justify better. This workshop specifically is not targeted for that. It obviously has some stuff which helps you improve, but it's obviously mostly just about becoming a better panel. And I will clarify what this workshop is about later so you have a better idea. Um, Getting this out of the way, this is not going to be a workshop about how to give a better OA, because if you're a chair and you came here figuring out wanting to develop your OA skills, you either came to the wrong place, or this is like okay, this is just not the place to find that, because this is mostly focused on the other part of chairing, which is managing panels during deliberation and how to improve the quality of deliberations that you manage. Thirdly, this is not going to be about tracking and note taking. I'll give some very, very small, brief pointers on how to track to improve deliberation. But if this is going to be, if you came here to look on how to track debates better, uh, there are other workshops which go into massive detail on how to track as really good. Finally, this workshop is not the holy grail. I am not the best judge in the world. There are a lot of other judges who are far better than me in judging. I am not even the wisest judge in the world. This workshop is constructed purely based on the experiences I've had in these 2-ish years, 2+ years I've had becoming a judge, and the experiences I've built along the tournaments I've joined. And just going you through through my mindset on how I've optimized the way I look at panel discussion as a whole, and just trying to share you what I've thought about this. Obviously, there are also other workshops which discuss panel management, probably by people who are far more experienced than me, i.e., later on, I'm going to share a series of workshops done by Hadar Goldberg, who literally has an entire series that explains how you can just be a better manager in deliberations, which I would highly encourage because I've also kind of gone to that to help myself as well. The whole point here is that there are a whole host of other workshops that exist online which will teach you how to be better judges. Uh, and let's just have a brief overview. These are some resources which I have personally gone to. So the first one is the Korea World's 2021 Training Program. I will share the PDF. I hope the PDF opens the link. The World's 2021 Training Program is also, I guess you could call it, another holy grail of judging, where it is basically like a free Coursera course on how to be a BP judge from beginner to advanced. And then there is the adjudicating program made by the Indian Debating League channel, which is mostly taught by Hadar Goldberg and some other top Indian debaters. I believe that was 2021. And then there's this other workshop. So the third workshop I linked specifically for you guys because I know that the Indian circuit is mostly does AP tournaments. That I know there's a huge amount of AP tournaments that exist, but if you guys are like starting out and you've only really done AP judging, this is a really good workshop for you to kind of figure out the transitioning process, because obviously AP and BP, despite being parliamentary formats, have the fundamentally different ways of judging. It is overall a nice written article. I would highly encourage it. Of course, there are a whole host of other series of workshops that I could provide, but if I did, this slide would be too long. Okay, what then is this workshop about? A huge part of British parliamentary debating that often a lot of novice judges, and sometimes even intermediate to advanced judges forget in terms of how you can improve as a judge, is that deliberations exist. And not only do they exist, you have to be good at deliberations in order to break consistently. In fact, I know a lot of judges who are conceptually good at justifying, but they were never really that well experienced in how to figure out contributing to a discussion, contributing to a deliberation. Because more often than not, just because you do have become a better judge by virtue of coming up with better justifications, by virtue of tracking better and overall, if you aren't able to articulate your thoughts during the deliberations process, that often holds you back quite often. And like the analogy I would use here is that sometimes you can have incredibly good analysis as a debater, but if your style is really bad, your manner, the way you deliver, if it's too messy, if it's too fast and ununderstandable, then you won't really be credited as highly compared to someone else who has a far greater concept of things like rhetorical persuasion and style, because the presentation of ideas is often something that's very important. And deliberation kind of follows that same concept, because in BP, the art of consensus judging is something where you have to understand that there are a guideline of skills when it comes to deliberating to consistently contribute positively to any deliberation you go to. And this exists as another skill which complements your ability to justify better. Because if you know what to do in deliberation, I guarantee you most of the time you will break quite a lot. Because you just know, okay, there are a specific set of skills I must do, there are a specific set of guidelines I must do in the deliberation process of that 15 minutes time that I ought to follow in order to be a good judge. Cool. So when it comes to shares and managing discussion, there are going to be like three pointers here. The first is someone who's become an ideal moderator. And when I talk about moderator, you can kind of think of it as like forum moderators. Ask discussions that ask questions and center discussion on specific issues and content comparisons that would broadly lead to a far more productive discussion. Secondly, how do you manage other panelists in the round? How do you make sure they contribute to the discussion? How do you guide novice panels to ensure you score them holistically? Thirdly, and most importantly, time management and efficiency in deliberation. Know that when you should stop someone, when you should stop yourself, and understanding that yapping is not very helpful a skill in just judging. For panelists, and I think far more importantly, since I'm assuming that most of you are panel level judges or training level judges, following the chair and ask what comparison the discussion, this discipline in focusing your contribution, your justification to the discussion at hand, expanding your scope, the scope of being a panelist by not just becoming a passive panelist, but asking questions and clarifications that you want additional perspective on, all for you to all for it to help you reach a far more better conclusion on the way you see a certain comparison. Finally, of course, the same feedback, same advice, time efficient justifications, the importance of writing down brief justifications and giving it straight to the point. So we're going to start with the chairing part first. So if you get promoted to chair, or if you have chair, if you're going to chair future rounds, and you have like a two-man panel or a four-man panel with two trainees, this is going to be very important because no matter how good you are as a judge, if your chairing sucks, then you're going to ruin the room because everything is all contingent on how you manage the deliberation. So if you screw up in managing the deliberation, you screw up the OA of the round, you delay the tournament, you piss off some people, you get bad feedback. You want that to not happen. Cool. Tip number one, moderating the discussion. So moderating the discussion is probably one of the most important elements of being a chair because if you really think about it, chairs are called chairs for a reason. They aren't just the judge that you get the OA from. They're literally the chairperson. Like in parliaments, the chairperson is the person who is facilitating the parliament. In this case, you are facilitating the other judges, you are facilitating the discussion. And I think a lot of chairs forget that you can actually get better at this. Like you can get better at managing deliberations and managing other panels by being a better moderator. And that would unironically help you get better feedback scores, especially if you're judging club tournaments. Because experienced panelists aren't just looking for the way you justify, but they're probably also looking for how are you able to efficiently manage the discussion in a way where you are specifically moderating. So the first set of sub advice I would give for this tip is to be very specific with the questions you ask when you are doing panel management, when you are chairing a discussion. So, for example, instead of asking a blanket reason, a blanket question towards your panelist, why does OG beat OO? You should ask, what was the argument that you got from X, maybe OG, that you believe it beats this argument from Y? Instead of asking how does he respond better to OO, ask how did this team respond to OO's argument and why did you think that response was enough to defeat their argument? Notice the huge difference in both questions here in terms of the broad question that is highlighted without a bold and the more specific bold question. What this does is it gives your panelists far more of a direction of where they should head their discussion into. Because the problem when you ask a broad question is that your panelist is just kind of gonna go on into a very long mini OA that might even last 2 to 3 minutes. And by the time that finish that, there's a lot of time that you're just kind of like wasting away because you allowed your panelists to give a mini OA. It's not that that mini OA is a wrong thing to do in terms of the justification part itself, but it is a wrong thing to do if you consider the fact that you are in a time restricted deliberation where being concise and clear as a chair and ensuring that you get the best contribution from your panel is important. So having better questioning skills often is sort of the tipping point for this. So how do you ask better questions? So The first and most important principle to understand is that stick to one pairwise comparison. You don't need to bring CG in if you're sticking to top half. I think this is very simple. This is something every judge should know. If you are saying, "Hey, can you tell me why opening is better than closing?" Don't do that. That's a very cringe thing to do as a judge. Okay, so other tips on how you ask better questions. This comes in form of preparing for the deliberation as you are judging the round. And this is something I do quite a lot. Whenever I'm tracking the round, I usually just type like a bunch of questions or a bunch of like annotations during my tracking notes of like what class do I expect needs to get resolved in this comparison? Or I want to see how my panels assess the weighing in a speech. Or I believe this response. What does my panel think about this response? To be precise, this is a similar skill you're taught to have when you're judging anyways. Because boiling down a specific pairwise comparison to a specific set of questions that aim to give the best conclusive answer towards resolving a clash is basically the same thing here. And it is something, a principle it should apply when it comes to being a moderator, when it comes to being a chair, where you have to prepare a set of simple ways to break deadlocks or a way to assess certain analysis and certain responses that you are now delegating that task towards but you are now delegating the task to your panels to get their perspective on how they resolve those things. And that is how you become a better chair. I think one of the first steps in becoming a better chair. It's all about getting more from your panel than just asking very broad, basic questions. Ask specific questions that aim to get specific goals out, i.e., what specific perspective you are aiming to get out from the debate and what thoughts of the panel you want to get. You're basically thinking of this as how can I direct my panel's thoughts towards a discussion point that I'm really looking forward to resolving. In this part, it is important to be clear with instructions. As I explained before, I would not encourage blanket asking justify top half. You should be precise with gauging what kind of perspective you want shared. So this goes hand in hand with the better questioning skills. Having much more clear instructions in terms of asking what your panels should do helps your ability to manage the discussion, but also helps you assess the win. For example, there are some ways that you can do this, i.e., briefly summarize the contribution of OG, gives you some pointers on how you can integrate the contribution of OG within the OA, but it also has an auxiliary benefit within the discussion process because it integrates the broad understanding of how the other panelists tracked and had and summarized the team's case. So to be very, very clear here, doing things like asking panelists to summarize a team's contribution helps you because you understand how your panel sees the team, sees how you're understanding the perspective of another panel's how they vibe with another team's contribution. Basically, it gives you pointers that you may have missed. Maybe your judge, your panelist, track another point that you may have missed as well. That you yourself can integrate within your OA, but also within how you evolve the discussion. Another thing is being specific with what weighing did this team give against OO and what metrics did you use to evaluate your weighing. This obviously helps you pinpoint how your panel resolved clashes, which can give you just far more resources, far more ways to manage the discussion because you know what your panel is giving to you to help you kind of pinpoint how you can best resolve clashes. There are a whole host of other examples, like what response did you fight with and why did you think the response was great? If you're comparing these two arguments together, what are the metrics and standards you are using to compare why one argument is beating the other? These specific set of instructions that you ask your panel are so much more concise, are so much more precise in helping the discussion become far more higher quality because you're not only helping yourself by giving yourself a better understanding of how you resolve certain clashes in pairwise comparisons, but you're allowing your panel to just have a better way of entering the debate. And think about it this way, you are not competing with your panel to get a better score. You're helping your panel. You're trying to help the trainee. You're trying to help the panel give a better discussion. So if you just ask them to blanket justify a team comparison, you're kind of not really giving much in the way of assessing a comparison. If you're specific and if you give clear instructions, you will often get the job done far more greater, far more clearer. So again, all of this has to do with the fact that you are playing the role of a forum moderator. You need to have management skills. Surprise, surprise. So identifying the specific set of instructions, specific set of questions, but also identifying the time to move on when you kind of already identify that the comparison is clear. Alongside figuring out when and what is the best way to resolve a close comparison after you have built up as much information as possible from the perspectives that you have asked your panelists to share on a specific point of discussion. Moderators in forum often guide their panelists to reach a conclusion whilst also directing the discussion to give clarity. You should apply that same principle in terms of having kind of like a clear narrative or script for every discussion. And we will talk about how you kind of establish a narrative in the discussion process, in the deliberation process. So all in all, it's just kind of becoming a moderator. You're guiding your other panelists to reach a conclusion on a specific clash. You're directing discussion to ensure that everyone is able to have a clarity of what the discussion is. You're directing your panelists to focus their thoughts in a specific way to resolve clashes, to resolve comparisons. And overall, you're just trying to be far more like reassuring and giving like just clarity, right? If you've ever seen forums before and you've ever seen how moderators moderate forums, you will understand how they do this. You will understand they do this. And you can kind of see here that, oh my God, so as a chair, it's not just about my justification and if I am justifying better and kind of just asking other people justifying and it kind of just clapping back. I actually have to be a moderator. And you will find out that if you are a moderator, you are being a far more helpful chair as a result. Let's have a bit of a example, and this is kind of a bit of funny example of how we can visualize a chair moderating discussion. This house would kill baby Hitler. OG explains two claims. Firstly, you avoid the death of 60 million people, so that's definitely a good idea. Secondly, this is just principally justified because you killed a bunch of people, you started a really bad war. Opening opposition explains that killing a baby, no matter who it is kind of sick and principally abhorrent. The second claim they launched is practically killing him won't change the fact that World War II would some other way due to geopolitical connections in the 1930s and 40s. So uh, let's now kind of visualize the process of how you could expect a ideal moderation of a deliberation to go. So let's say panel A votes OG, panel B and I vote OO. This is just like not really including any other deeper analysis. This is just like an example for the sake of it being an example. So starting the discussion for the top half debate, I would probably be like, okay, so I think for this clash, we could kind of focus onto two different points or two different clash points. Firstly, on the discussion of whether or not this is going to be practically better for the world. And secondly, on whether or not it's principally justified to kill baby Hitler. So within this, I asked panel A to briefly summarize the contribution of OG and explain which specific analysis or which specific idea they found the most important. So I'm asking the dissenting panel, hey, could you just tell me what you think OG did? Why did you think, what was the specific tipping point analysis that you found to be the most important in resolving the clash on your end? And of course, I ask this because I want to know the perspective of my panelists. I want to know what their criteria is in judging the debate, and this would be helpful for me to understand before I move on with the discussion. So notice how I'm starting the process of moderation. I'm constructing the narrative of the deliberation. I am getting the perspective of the dissenter to give me the most amount of information on how I can further then resolve this. So let's say panel A tells me that they were for the practical clash specifically, they believe the way they justify it is opening government explains that even if we don't know what happens after killing baby Hitler, there is a certainty that we prevent the deaths of 60 million people, and they find this impact more compelling. To further build off on this justification, I kind of ask them and clarify. So your specific tipping point is the avoidance of 60 million people dying. Do you think this harm matters more than a specific set of OO harms OO is providing? Within this, it's also important to refer to the manual on metrics and standards that are being used to break the clash. Follow the world's manual. Metrics must be agreed explicitly within a team's cases or implicitly agreed upon. This just helps you give a better understanding on the grounds that you should use to assess the debate. So let's say panel A reaffirms their stance and explains that they do not think OO provided enough likelihood analysis to prove the impact of a worse outcome of the Hitler's death. They say that it is speculative to believe that other actors like Stalin, Mussolini, or Tojo would spark a worse version of the war. Following this process of moderation, I now fully understand Panel A's contribution within the discussion for the top half debate. I fully understand their perspective and what specific lines of reasoning they have in how they decided to break the clash. Now I can direct Panel B to respond with their perspective. I aim to give specific instructions to Panel B to ensure that the Panel B gives the maximum amount of clarity to give the most informed perspective. So I asked Panel B, given that Panel A believes that a specific response wins ocean debate, how did you assess the truthfulness of this response, and what counterclaim slash preemptive material does OO have which insulates them from this response? So I won't go on and kind of continue the example, but what I've done here is sort of give you an understanding of the narrative of moderation. How there's like a clear beginning on how you begin the process of moderation by boiling it down and giving your panelists the discussion point for them to sort of direct their thoughts in a way that is productive instead of just giving them a blanket broad justification. Direction is always far better to give towards your panelists. You need to follow a structured plan of leading discussion for every comparison, being specific with what claims and clashes you want to resolve, and establishing the clear grounds of comparison via metrics and standards to use. Once you following the structure upgrades your panic management skills to a new level because you're no longer just a passive chair, you're being an active chair. You're leading discussion forward with insightful questions and bring discussion forward. That's how you become a good moderator. That's how you become a far better quality chair in terms of like managing the panel. And that's overly key in managing the panel. This is the difference becoming a 6 to 5 panel and a 7 to 8, sorry, a 6 to 5 chair and a 7 to 8 chair. Tip number 2, time management. We've already explained how you can improve the quality of a deliberation. Now we'll explain how to improve the efficiency of a deliberation. So I think deliberations often go over time because of three specific reasons. The first, that chairs don't know that they should stop panelists talking for too long. The second is that chairs forget that they should stop themselves from yapping for too long. And the third is that chairs often forget that they have to assess 6 comparisons within 15 minutes to assess a full call. If you notice, a lot of deliberations that you've probably been in BP probably go over time quite a lot because chairs don't realize, crap, I need to keep in time. And I think further than this, there's a bad culture of chairs not caring about the fact that they should keep it on time. There are a lot of chairs who like are insistent of keeping the discussion go and dragging it on towards a point which is just like, why are you going over time because of the sake of wanting to discuss more? Sometimes you need to know that you should stop because you don't want to delay the tournament, you don't want to delay the round. In fact, a lot of rounds get delayed because chairs just don't know when to stop. You should know when to stop. Like, I'm sorry, you're not really going to get much more feedback if you're keeping it to a 25-minute discussion of a bin room in round 5. It's really not that deep. Please keep it brief, keep it short. I will not be there for people speak, but I will assure you that OC and CAP will probably be wanting you to make sure that you're keeping it within a time limit. So yeah, how then can you get better at time management? Firstly, stop your panelists if you notice they are dragging it on. And this is the exact reason why you ask specific questions. Again, I'm shitting on broad questions again. The problem with broad questions is that they don't have a clear narrative flow. You can't expect every single judge to understand the very specific thing that they should explain, so they would end up explaining everything. Aside from the process of moderation we explained before, impose a time limit. Tell your panels, speak for 60 seconds, speak for 30 seconds. Don't let them go on for 5 minutes because God forbid that's going to delay the discussion and it will lead to nowhere. Like I'm telling you guys, if you let your panel cook for 5 minutes, first off, they're undercooking because 5 minutes is like marginal returns. Secondly, a lot of that discussion is probably just, oh, so it's probably just them kind of rambling on. Like panels should have the expectation onto themselves that they must contribute to the discussion with conciseness. elaboration is good, but elaboration is only good if you are keeping it straight to the point. I don't need to hear the full story of the evolution of the complex top half, even if it's world's finals worthy, because I've already heard how the debate went on. I want to know specifically what are you boiling down this comparison to why you believe a team beats another team. It's very, very simple. Keep it short, force your panelists to keep it short. And I highly, highly encourage as panelists yourself to keep yourself short. Keep your discussion short. You really don't have to go long. It's not going to give you full speaks. In fact, my experience as CAing a lot of tournament, I've often found a lot of chairs complain that panelists are deliberating for too long. So again, drill it down to your head and remember it. Keep it as a holy grail advice. The long deliberations are not productive. Short deliberations are. Be clear, be concise to the point. I know I sound like I'm rambling and kind of complaining about this, but I feel this is an incredibly big structural problem that I notice a lot of panelists fall themselves into. They're discussing for way too long when they really don't need to. So yeah, mini rant over. It's still part of the discussion. Like just generally, like it's I would like this is not really just even a tangent. It's just a genuine cry for help. Please don't go over time. Here's an example. OG, the first block, don't say, is a huge block of just yapping and rambling. Like, don't do this. You really don't need to tell the story. Do the second one. Look at how clear and concise it is. On the discrimination clash, OG compared to Shell score, they give 3 mechs. Would you like me to elaborate on any of this? Notice how clear and concise this contribution is. And like, if you're asked to elaborate, then elaborate in a way without storytelling for 10 minutes. You can storytell, but storytell for 30 seconds. Be clear on the way you're justifying. You don't have to go on to this long rambling rant. Okay? Keep it short. It honestly is fine if you keep it short. It is the 15-minute rule is there for a reason. It's to teach and force judges that they should be efficient. I mean, like if it like in this culture, like there should not be a culture of keeping discussion too long just for the sake of, haha, need to get details. Like you won't get that much details if you're keeping it too long because everything gets lost in translation. Of course, the same rule applies to yourself as chairs. I would argue that chairs themselves also have to be concise, but not only do have to be concise, they have to be the most concise. Because the whole point of deliberation and chairing a discussion is that yes, you should add your discussion. You should add your justification because obviously um that's how you get scored by the panel, how well your justification is. But people forget that when it comes to evaluating chairs, if you look at the Korea chair feedback scale, there's an entire other discussion on panel management. Like the third criteria in the feedback scale is literally all about how well a chair manages. So as a chair, you should be able to balance the way you add on to a debate by your justifications, but also being a concise moderator, which means that you often have to have the hardest role of keeping your justifications concise and effectively managing the panel. Of course, it doesn't mean you should sacrifice the quality of your justification, but you should definitely try to keep it short because you are the chairman, you are the chairperson. You're managing the deliberation. You're ultimately responsible for it ending on time. If you if it is going over time, you have failed as a chair, and you deserve to not get a high score because the fact that you failed in 1 out of 3 criteria of being a good chair. And panelists, when it comes to evaluating chairs, I want you guys to actually focus on how your chair manages the discussion. In fact, again, I will send a link of the Korea feedback scale on panel to chair feedback. You will notice that there is a huge section that literally explains how you should evaluate how chairs are managing the discussion. If they are terrible at managing discussion, even if they're a really good judge, like discussion goes 30 minutes because they suck at being time efficient, that is grounds to tank him. In fact, there are judges in AVP who have not broken, like at least the AVP that I was in, because the fact that they just sucked at managing a panel, despite the fact that they could give good OAs. Make sure that you discuss every comparison because there are 6 comparisons within a house, and you should learn to be efficient. So, for example, if a team has clearly lost, you can just be like, clearly CEO is clearly lost. I'm going to ask panel A to summarize their extension and explain why they're out. Please keep this brief. So, yeah, this is a very important segment because time management is the reason tournaments are ruined. I've seen a lot of tournaments, including my own tournaments I've organized, that are completely out of my control because for some reason judges really, really, really like insisting that they need to stay on discussion, that just go into 25 minutes discussion where it should be 15 and they're the last person to submit the ballot. In fact, I'm not even going to absolve myself here. I am responsible for this. I used to be my number one biggest weakness as a judge was that I was taking too long because I kept being obsessed over being like trying to keep it like that. And sometimes I still make this mistake when I'm judging rules. I still make this mistake when I'm judging tournaments. So don't be like me. Don't be like the judge who extends and ruins the tournaments as like schedule on time. Make sure that you're being a good time management. Of course, there are better ways. There are other ways to help in this. Allocate specific times to discussion. Uh, Prioritize least contentious to most contentious. Obvious calls are short and sweet, nothing deep required. A brief overview of each panel's perspective would do. As you move on to different comparisons, internally look at your timer. Your timer is your best friend. Your timer tells you how long you've been in the discussion. It tells you when you should stop, when you should split, or maybe if you have more time than you should. If you've spent 15 minutes on one comparison during deliberations, you are a terrible moderator, you are a terrible judge. I don't make the rules. It also really helps, by the way, in helping managing time efficiency to give your panels different roles. So if panel A has already summarized OG's case, panel B does not give their own summary because it doesn't matter. If panel A has summarized OG's case and they've responded and they've explained why they believe respective of OO is wrong, then you can just have panel B narratively flow onto that discussion and explain why they believe actually no, OO is a good OO's response actually works. OO's response is actually good. So yeah, broadly in terms of fixing time management, it's all about A, prioritizing which comparison, whether or not it's least contentious and not spending much time on least contentious. When it comes to most contentious, making sure you give more airtime to that, but making sure you fundamentally keep everyone's contributions concise, precise, and short. The quality should still be there. Obviously, don't give arbitrary, weird deliberation. Like I thought PM spoke really nicely, but make it clear on the tipping point. What is the one small thing, the small, the crucial crux that you believe, and make it clear that is your belief instead of telling a story of, oh, this is the top up debate. OG says five things, and then you just say that for 5 minutes for some reason. Look at the timer. The timer is your best friend. Your timer helps you gauge when you should stop. It is okay to split on a comparison if you feel like you really, really need to go on other things. It is fine. It really doesn't matter. At best, you can try to extend it for 20 minutes, but even then, I would really not encourage it. I'm guilty of this. I kind of don't follow my own advice. Like sometimes I'd be like, okay, maybe 20 minutes won't help. Maybe 20 minutes would help. But I've sort of tried to learn to be like, okay, look, we need to set this up time. Let's just split here. Um, that's just life. We weren't able to beat the consensus. That's fine. It's stuff happens. Yeah. So overall, be very, very important on the way you manage your time. If you manage your time badly, I don't make the rules. Why? What, you are not really doing much for the debate. Cool. Okay, so we have brought 1 hour left. So that very, very actually much nicely wraps up the chairing tips in terms of panel management. So yeah, so as a chair, remember your job as a chair isn't just I give OA, I get it's like how do I say this? Your job as a chair, especially if you're competing and you're chairing all rounds, isn't just I step into deliberation, I yap, I allow my panelists to yap, I yap, and then I get OA, and then I get top judge. I mean, yeah, some tournaments you can do that and get away with it, and if you do, good for you. But I would still encourage you to follow these steps in terms of the managing chairs. So, what is the summary? What did we learn in sharing? Firstly, specific questions. Asking specific questions is good. Make sure you give your wings an easier time to their thoughts on the most important points of discussion. Secondly, evolve the discussion in a way which leads to a nice conclusion. Remember that you are a moderator. You do not need to dominate the discussion, you need to facilitate it. And I want you guys as chairs to remember this. You do not need to dominate a discussion. Like, yes, dominating a discussion in some instances gets you better scores, but you are putting the trade-off is that you're not allowing your other panelists to have a fair chance to contribute in the round. Like that is kind of unfair because imagine you tank your trainee, you give them a 2 for not saying much in the debate, But then for the entire point of deliberation, you were the only one who was talking and you weren't really asking your training questions. And when you were asking your training questions, you kind of just stopped at one thought they said. They said like one sentence of why they think they team won, and you just stop there. Like help your trainees, help your panelists, tell them, hey, okay, so this is what you think. What did you think about XYZ? Someone is unmuted, by the way. Please mute. I'm not sure who that is.
Namaskar.
Hold on. I'm not sure. Okay, I do. Yeah. So your timer is your friend. Do everything it takes to not fail your friend, who is the timer, even if it means interrupting a panel. Finally, allocate discussion points accordingly to make sure that you get everything done. Sometimes you sacrifice added perspective or sometimes you sacrifice added time to get additional perspective, or sometimes you sacrifice the time needed to clutch out a flip. But most of the time, in my experience, long deliberations often lead to deadlocks anyways. Unless it's the grand finals where you have every right to go into deep detail on resolving a close comparison. In preliminaries, this is really not that important. Um, this is just like a broad range. So that is all in the first part of the workshop on how to become a better moderator when it comes to being a chair judge in deliberations. So the next section we're going to focus on is, of course, the paneling stuff. But before that, we can take a short 3-ish minute break. If anyone has any questions on this part of the workshop, I highly encourage you should ask. Otherwise, if you kind of just want to leave your questions later on in the end of the workshop, you can. But if there are any questions in relating to chairing, you can ask. The workshop isn't over yet. We still haven't gone through the other half of how to be a better panel, but it's just a time for you guys to ask questions on how to become a better chair. All right. In the meantime, I get to drink my water, so there's that. Yeah, so you guys can type it out in the chat. You can just like let me know. In the meantime, if you guys want to kind of enjoy the break, we'll resume again in 2 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna run to the toilet. I hope if anyone wants to ask a question specifically, type it in the chat. Once I come back from the toilet, I think we'll just resume if no one has questions.
All right. I think no one has questions. Uh, I'm going to take that as a good sign that my workshop is very understandable and everyone has got it clear. So let's now move on to, I guess, a more relevant part of judging, because again, I assume to the best of I assume that most people here are panel level judges or trainee level judges, and I assume like this is still like mostly the part that is probably more relevant to you. I would still say though that even if you are a panel main, like you've mostly paneled tournaments your most of your career, the chairing tips are still very important, because you never know when you're gonna get promoted to a chair. And if you get promoted to a chair and you have no idea what to do, now you know how to do it. But also, if you are still remaining as a panel, you now know how to expect the process of deliberation to go to. And as a panelist, if you find out that your chairs are not really making the discussion in a way which is quite contributive, i.e., making the discussion less about just you say this, I say this, you say this, I say this, good end. It is more of just a let's try to moderate this in a way where we're able to answer a set of specific questions that overall leads to a far more informed conclusion. And I think like the principle behind moderating is the idea of informed consent. I can't believe I'm using a principle to analogize how to better judge, but quite literally, um, you give you are able to consent far more greater to any decision if you have the most amount of information on it. And that is basically how deliberations work. It's all about having the most amount of information to construct the most accurate call. And the process of reaching the most helpful amount of information overall revolves around the way you moderate discussion. And if your chair isn't doing that, um, then you should have a very, very honest outlook on the way you score them. Again, I'm not saying to tank your chairs if they don't moderate, but I am saying to put into consideration the way they moderate a discussion in how you rank and how you give feedback to your chairs. After all, chairs are also learning themselves. They want to get feedback, and a lot of it has to do, of course, with the fact that, hi, how can I, yeah. And like I think a lot of people often forget that a huge part of giving feedback to chairs is literally how they manage panels. It is in the feedback scale. There's an entire section in the feedback scales that objectively ranks in the rubric how you should do this. Okay, so that's enough yapping about chair. I hope that has helped you regardless of whether or not you're a trainee or beginner or whatsoever, even as a debater. Let's get on to the most important part of this workshop, arguably assuming you guys are probably main panels. Paneling tips. First tip, follow the chair. This is not that deep, but this is often very important. And I think this is a step that everyone follows well already, but I just wanted to put it here in terms of a reminder. Follow your chair. If your chair asks you to focus on X clash in top half comparison, you focus on X clash in top half comparison. Chairs are asking you to are highlighting discussion on specific comparisons for a reason, because they want to resolve their comparison and they want to hear your thoughts. So obviously give your thoughts. And when it comes to following the chair, provide them with a specific set of information that they are looking for. And like overall, this is just step one, the bare minimum step of being a good panelist. Follow your chair. If you're wanting to discuss something else, like let's say if the chair wants to discuss X and you instead go discussing Y, even if you are correct in prioritizing that aspect of the debate, your chair probably disagrees, and the disagreement will be reflected in your feedback. And like you don't want to get tanked, even if you believe you're right. There's like a balance between wanting to wanting to exercise your right, but also wanting to exercise the chair's authority. Like at the end of the day, the chair technically, while they don't have supreme authority, well, I guess they do. In some semblance of the case, they have authority in the way they are managing discussion. So you should still kind of follow them. However, the next piece of advice I'm going to give might sound like it's contradicting this, but it will make sense. Tip number 2 is all about precision and insight. And this is all about how you can become a far more active panelist. And I think this is one out of 3 of the most important tips that I want you guys to really take note of, think about, ask questions, because this is probably what upgrades you, whether or not you come from being a trainee to being a panel, or becoming a panel to finally being promoted as a chair. And the thesis of this first tip is that being a passive panel is the reason you do not break. Sometimes you can actually get above and beyond, not just justifying what the chair asks you to do, but chipping in to helping out the discussion. So like, you don't just have to follow the steps of the chair. You can have your own autonomy in like kind of just deciding what is it that you can do that is contributing to the debate. And overall, like if you don't get that step right, then I just realized my video is not on. You know what? It doesn't matter. Yeah, if you don't get that step right of like not really adding on to the discussion aside from what the chair is asking you to say, chairs will often have the perception of you being just okay, so that's really it. Thanks. Like some chairs will value the quality of the justification you have when they ask you to. And good, chairs keep doing that. Don't impose additional burden onto your panel for being above and beyond. If they give you if you give you an amazing justification and that's it, you rank them well on that amazing justification. What I'm trying to say here very specifically is that as a panel, you should try to elevate the deliberation, to elevate and evolve the deliberation with your own perspective and insights, aside from what the chair has already asked. I.e., this example here. I agree that OO beats OG on the principle, but I was confused about the significance of this argument. Is there any chance we could talk about that? So this is similar to how chairs moderate, because as a panel, you should also try to moderate yourself. You're not dominating the moderation, that's still your chair's job, but you are adding on your take because the fact that you want to chip in on other perspectives, or you want to give commentary on other claims, other points that you feel like should be discussed as well, if you feel like the chair is not really focusing on these points of discussion. If you want to focus on another clash, but the top half of the comparison is mostly boiled down to one clash, then you can bring it up and ask, hey guys, I think we should talk about this other clash as well. I personally rate it highly. What did you guys think as well of this clash? Like, people often forget that panelists have the right to say stuff. It's just that you have to balance that right in not disrupting the chair. So it's a delicate balance between I wouldn't want to say stepping in, but it's a delicate balance between how you kind of go within a debate and do stuff out of your own accord without inhibiting the quality of the discussion by not allowing the chair to do their job. There is a balance in which how you do this, and you should try to get that balance. So again, as we kind of highlight here, it is not just about how you saw the debate and explaining that perspective. It is the way that you elevate the discussion by contributing your own unique takes, your own commentary. And the Korea World's 2021 Wing Feedback Scale has a very good comment that kind of highlights this. So this is from the chair to panel feedback scale. It is not just outstanding contribution to discussion that reflects exceptional judgment considering what is relevant and useful to discussion. It is a clear sense of priority. It is being very helpful and incisive in commentary. Being helpful is all about elevating the deliberation by providing insights that overall make the discussion more productive, because you're giving additional new questions for the chair of what you think should be discovered as well, or commentary you've made on specific pieces of analysis that you'd like to ask resolve. So, for example, maybe within a discussion, I can ask, okay, I agree that opening government does XYZ things in far better off, but I feel like we should also consider the framing that opening opposition gives within a debate. I wanted to ask you guys, how did you value this framing? Because I personally believe it outframes a huge chunk of the impacts from opening government, even if we believe that they have responded clearly well. So notice how, as a panelist, I'm kind of taking charge without trying to lead the discussion, but I'm just like kind of trying to chip in. You're trying to be the good group member. You're trying to be the productive group member. You're trying to be you're like contributing to the project in a way which is enhancing that project by adding in what you think should be important to add on to that project. So, as I mentioned before, there should be a balance. You need to provide these insights and ask questions, but ensure you also follow the chair's direction in comparisons. The way I would do this is prioritize finishing what the chair is looking for first. So after the chair is satisfied in the way you have contributed and added on to their question, so let's say they ask you a question on resolving a specific clash point, you've done that, the chair is happy, and then you can be like, okay, we've resolved this part, but I also want to talk about this as well. Notice how taking charge and realizing you have autonomy as a panel adds so much value to your ability as a judge in the panel discussion, because chairs will see that you're trying to take initiative in creating a better call. If chairs see this and be like, this is bad judging, with all due respect, they themselves are bad judges. Actually, no, with no due respect. If they think that taking charge as a panel is a bad idea of a panel, they clearly haven't read the scoring scale of how you should score panels. And our other worlds breaking chairs would probably kind of agree with me that they want to look for panels who aren't just contributing by answering simple questions that they are asking, but going above and beyond in trying to make sure that they are also contributing to the discussion in just not just explaining the debate. So, of course, when it comes to this doing, the timing, this is the same advice I gave in terms of the timing. I guess you could call this paneling tip 3, but I didn't really figure I should include it as a separate tip because it's literally the same thing. So I'll keep this brief. Timing is important, short and sweet justification is valued, understanding that cutting down the filler is important. You already know what to do here. Always keep an internal clock, keep it short and sweet. The reason we keep it short and sweet for both chairs, panel, and trainees is because training yourself to give condensed discussions helps you to condense the most important summaries and assessments of a team contribution. It allows you to train yourself to say what actually matters and filter out what doesn't matter. So if you keep training yourself to give 90 seconds discussion of a really high analytically dense debate, obviously you're improving your own ability to condense the way you justify things in a far more better way because you're elevating your own justification by just, keeping it clear, concise, and straight to the point. Very important. I've already ranted about why timing is important. This is just a reminder that you should also be remembering how you should time efficiently when you are giving justification. Right. Handling tip number 3. How to give valuable substantive justification. So I know I said just now that this workshop is not going to be focused on how to improve your justification ability, but I do figure that there are some pointers I should give you guys when it comes to discussing better as a wing. But this is more relevant to what you should be doing in deliberation rather than improving as a judge, but it's still the same thing. So this is part 2 out of 3 that I mentioned just now of important like holy grails. I've been saying holy grail a lot, but I think it is quite literally a holy grail. Anyways, quite literally, valuable substantive justification and how you should do it. And I would point out that this is not contingent on whether or not you decide to be proactive. Because again, on one hand, you will not be discredited. You should not be discredited. You should not be penalized. You should not be tanked just because you don't do tip number 2 of offering far more position and insight and far more and exercising your autonomy as a judge. Like if you don't do that, you won't get tanked because chairs necessarily don't impose that burden onto you. Like in the world's manual, I will admit themselves that it is a criteria to do everything I've mentioned in tip number 2, but it is not a mandatory criteria. So if you miss that criteria, chairs don't have a right to really kind of thank you. They can observe that you did not do it, but it can still give you a valid 7 or 8 because the fact that you still have valuable substantive justification. Overall, just having good justification goes a long way in breaking at literally most tournaments. And I'm just going to give some pointers on how you can follow the process of giving valuable justification. Tip number 1, don't repeat speeches, summarize and evaluate speeches. Judges often repeat a speech instead of distilling the essence of an argument, which, as I have explained and complained about before in very great detail, leads to deliberations to take up more time and are often harder to keep off. I won't go too deep into this because I already have. When it comes to justifying, you really, really do not need to give a complex, elaborative narrative story of how the top half debate went. For the love of God, get straight to the point. If you don't get straight to the point, you are ruining the discussion for everyone else. And I say that very, very heavily, not lightly. Please, okay, I get it. I'm done complaining here, but this is something that I take a very, very high amount of passion when it comes to giving feedback to. Cool. Secondly, if you think about what your chair is after, it will often be about making sure that all key aspects of a case are considered when weighing two teams with each other. So let's say a bunch of questions that I have in my mind. Did OG actually prove that World War II would be avoided, or did he just assert it? Maybe some other stuff, like how did CS characterization clash against the OO framing? All proof X point really isn't too useful to say as a blanket reason. The aim of your discussion, the aim of your contribution, when you are asked to justify a team, when you're asked to answer a question, is to unpack the argument in a way which is just summarizing what the teams have said, see what analysis is backing it up, evaluate the mechanisms, evaluate the importance, and evaluate how it's weighed in debate. This 4-step process is usually the blanket skeleton of how most judges choose to deliberate, how most judges contribute to discussion, how they structure their justification. You unpack the argument, you see what analysis is backing up, you evaluate its impact, and overall, you should follow this step because it gives you a good structure. Amongst other tips, cite the specific lines backing a point and use the team's language. Again, this doesn't mean repeating the speech, but referring directly to the claims made by the teams to ensure that you're not filling in or stepping in. Use the language that the teams have said to make sure that you are telling the judge, you are telling the chair, I listened to what the team said. Not only did I listen to what the team said, I'm actively referring to what they said to give my justification. Really, really helps a lot in showing that you are tracking the debate correctly. Secondly, if you have issue, like you're not crediting a certain team's case, try your best to identify what the real issue is. For example, if your justification is this team made their base argument at the 6th minute of DPM, so what? Cool, sure, okay, that is a problem. But why is that a problem? I don't know. But you can be specific about why there's a problem. You can say, they didn't analyze this argument to the extent to which it need to be convincing, which isn't a surprise because they started this argument at 6 minutes, which was like a strategic error on their behalf. Like, yeah, overall, be specific if you can't credit things. More often than not, it is very, very good that you become specific. It is very, very good that you try your best to keep it straight to the point. And overall, it's important to identify what is really your main problem, or what is really the way you are evaluating what things is good. Finally, on flipping, I think a lot of novice panels flip too easily, or make it a pain in the ass for the chair because they don't flip with concrete reasoning. Guys, flipping is the main fun of BP judging. I have had a lot of fun in grand finals or outrounds panel where I am either the one being flipped or I am the one flipping after a very, very tense call. You are still politely debating against another judge who has a contradictory call, and a lot of it has to do with the fact of how well you flip. Overall, it doesn't mean you shouldn't flip without reason. Make it a point to tell your chairs why you flip or why you stick with your call. It's just an extra line of clarity that makes you sound more honest and more genuine. Because even if you have a disagreement, it is a big difference in becoming perceived as a stubborn asshole panel and we respectfully agree to disagree. Your perspective is opinion. I understand. Let's just split. Like, you always want to make sure that if you can't agree on something, you make it clear why you can't agree on it without sounding like you're just like trying to be an asshole about it. And if you're flipping, do the converse of that. Explain why you flip. Explain, okay, so whenever I flip, I always make it a point to structure it like this. Okay, so I'm happy to flip. So the reason I initially stuck to my call was because I thought that this team had done this claim quite well, and I didn't believe that it was responded. However, your justification has helped me realize that there were indeed some points of engagement, and also the fact that this team really doesn't prove this claim to the fullest extent. I agree that they missed some beats of analysis, which doesn't make this fully persuasive. I'm very happy to flip as a result of that. Like, you don't have to be, you really don't have to suck up to the chair, but at the same time, you can explain it in a way which doesn't sound like you're sucking up. You're just trying to give clarity, and you're just trying to be honest. Honesty is good, guys. Be honest. If you kind of just try to hide the fact that you're insecure about your call, you will probably stick to trainee. And I have unfortunately seen a lot of trainees who are way too scared to talk about why they flip, or they just flip too easily, even though they don't personally believe it. Be honest. Like, it's really fine. It's really not that deep. Don't worry, guys. Cool. If you're still convinced of a particular, again, I said this before, right? If you're still convinced of a particular comparative, give reasons for why you think one team is coming over another team. I said it before, right? CJ's case sounds better than OG, but when I look at the mechanisms of give, they're the same as OG. It is just worded as different principal justification. I need more reason as to believe why this is a distinct of an extension, aside from the fact that I believe them. Yeah. So long discussion, long justification, but it's just me trying to explain. Hey, I'm sticking with this call because this is what I believe in, and I believe I need more reason to believe why I should flip. You're giving, and when it comes to flipping and the idea of wanting to flip, you should try, and this is a tip that I like to do a lot. This is a tip that I really, really like to do a lot, especially in outrounds discussion. I word my justifications in a way where I actively try to hint at the panel or the chair what would convince me. So notice how I specifically say, I need more reason to believe why this is distinct of an extension. That is basically me explicitly highlighting to the other judges in the room, hey, I'm sticking with this call.
because I believe that this is not. I believe that this is not really enough. However, I would need. However, if I'm given more reason to believe that there are actually mechanisms or whatever else ideas that this team gives, then I could be persuaded to flip. This is something chairs and panelists should do. If you are sticking to your call, or if you're fighting for a team, make it. Don't be stubborn and be like, oh, I still believe this team does this because of XYZ reasons. Like that is echo chamber panel discussion. You want to avoid echo chamber discussion. You want it to be open to flipping. um if you are very even and I would say even if you are really strict stubborn with one call, well, not stubborn, even if you're really certain that there's no way one team beats another, you should still be open to the fact that there might be a valid perspective. Like you could say, look, I'll be honest, I really don't believe there is a world in which CG beats OG. I generally think they're fully derivative. However, if I have enough reason to believe that there's enough distinct analysis that I can credit to be different, then maybe I could be open to flipping. It's just that right now I really don't believe it. If you let's say you say that, and let's say you say that, that adds a lot of value, that adds a lot of layers to the way you're contributing to discussion, because you're standing your ground, but you're also being open to flipping. And that's good. That's okay. Even chairs should do this. Even if you were stubborn, okay, stubborn. I use stubborn as if it's a negative connotation. It technically the word is if you are like very confident with your call, if you're very sticking to your call, you should always try to be open to other teams, other judges' perspective. And like I have done this even in the case where I have stuck to my call aggressively to the end. I've split, where like, look, I just think that I need more reason to believe this. If the alternative is you saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not really flipping because I still think that I'm just going to repeat the same reason I said before. I just think that CJ is derivative. Boom, I'm done. Like you're not giving extra leeway. And think of it this way: flipping and the art of flipping is all about negotiation. I think a lot of it has to do with negotiation and how you kind of pursue and adopt the art of negotiation to begin with. So like try to negotiate when it comes to disagreements. And again, at the end of the day, if the negotiation ends in a deadlock where you can't agree on each other's call, split and explain what you're splitting. Overall, this will not get you tanked. This will get you higher scores because you're just, again, going back to the philosophy of what this workshop is all about. You're adding on and contributing to the discussion in a way which is meaningful. Because even if you cannot reach a consensus, you're approaching it in a way in which you fully understand why each other teams has a perspective. And like I'm a communication student. I literally study communications. A whole part of my syllabus is studying negotiation. And I found value in studying theories that just have like this idea of, look, it's good that you guys have a common ground, even if you don't agree on switching sides. Understanding the best extent of the common ground. Why is it that you have one side? Why is it that each other side? Trying to understand why each other side is valid is a whole part of making a process of deliberation functional. Like, whether it be you're being a negotiator, somehow even in jury duty, but most importantly, relevantly when you are judging. Let's now summarize this part of the workshop and overall end the workshop and get on to the Q&A session. Step number 1, follow the chair. You're trying to help them with their OA. You're responsible for keeping the deliberations clear. If chairs are asking you to do something, you do that something. Secondly, however, balance that ability with exercising. Oh, hold on. Might be beyond the scope of the workshop. Okay, I will answer this later. I'll answer this later in the Q&A session. Exercise your autonomy as a panel and feel free to add more than what the chair asks. Aim to evolve the discussion to what you also believe matters, alongside making sure you are timely and crystal clear. So again, keep a balance between following the chair but also following your gut. Thirdly, know what makes a good justification. Judge the debate that happens. Don't apply arbitrary standards. Don't make stupid reasons like I believe this team had better points. Please don't do that. Like even if you're just starting out debating, I will let you know that if your justification for a team is just I think OG was better than OO, I think their points are better, you're getting a 1 because that's clear that you don't know how to justify the debate. Like I know that sounds harsh, but it's just true. Don't justify in a bad way. Justify assessing the content of a team that's given. Track the content of a team that's given. Again, there are other workshops to tell you how to do this better. This is not the workshop for it, but please do that. I'm reminding you to do that. Structure your justifications to give the wing, the panel, whatever, every judge in the room the breakdown of the team's contribution in deciding a clash. Whether you flip or no flip, it's always a good idea to explain why you're flipping or sticking, what leads you to change your mind, or why you're unconvinced. Trust me, this won't thank you because you approach it unless you approach it in a lazy way. Okay, so overall, that ends this workshop. Some extra tips. If you are dealing with someone who doesn't know what they are doing, let's say you are a panelist and your chair is someone who is somehow even more novice than you, feel free to intervene. Feel free to pseudo chair. I have chaired a bunch of rounds. I have literally chaired a grand final. I have literally paneled a grand finals round where the chair was someone who it was their first time ever chairing a finals and they weren't really clear on what the steps were doing. So I was just like, hey, okay, let's discuss this instead. And they're like, oh, okay, we can start this. And then they kind of just guys just guiding them, right? Just don't be rude about it. They're still new. They had a chance to develop. Secondly, follow the scale. Don't let your emotion decide the scale. You should already know this. Saltiness of disagreement and admiration of buried judgment. Please get the better of your judgment. Do not be emotional. Finally, ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from your chairs after the deliberation ends. Sometimes you can even ask for panelist feedback too. I've always made it a point to ask for other panelists who I know who are better than me for feedback on my chairing, and they often give really good insights if they do respond. Of course, step 3 is sometimes not the easiest step to do because sometimes your chair doesn't actually ask you, your chair doesn't respond to you. However, in people speak, it is a physical tournament. Ask your judges for feedback. They can give you good comments. Cool. Okay. So finally, there are other resources. Obviously, I'm not the worst. I'm not the first workshop to do this. I will not be the last, but I believe these workshops are good. A lot of the material that I made within this workshop is directly referenced off, or even like kind of like, kind of just like annotated and copied off from these resources. Like these are broadly like I guess you could call these the references lah. So you know there. Okay, so the first one is how to be a good and useful wing judge. So I'm going to very briefly share this one. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I will be back and sharing the main slides. Give me a second. It was just here. Cool. So I'm going to share this specific tab here, and it will be important why I share this tab. So this Google Docs, this manual is, I would say, the golden rule book on how to be a good wing judge. It is where a lot of my references come in. It is where a lot of the material I reference from my workshop comes here, and this specific Google Docs explains things in a far more better comprehensive way. I will send the link to this one in the WhatsApp group. I highly encourage you guys go there. Okay, going back to the main slides. Oh wait, I don't know why I raised my own hand. Yeah. So going back here. Then there are other videos. There is other videos on how to be a chair, how to be a panel, and of course Luigi Alkinesis' YouTube channel, which explains short form videos on judgment concepts, which I think are very good for you to follow. That is all for the workshop. We have just about 12 minutes left for Q&A session. So I'm going to share the docs of the workshop in the WhatsApp group right now. I'm also going to stop scaring. So now it's time to ask questions. I'm going to ask the first questions. Might be beyond the scope of the workshop, but I struggle with opening bench and closing bench comparisons, i.e. OG and CO, OO and CG. I honestly think that diagonal comparisons are just kind of assessing, like, it is just it is similar fundamental to how I would assess OG and OO and CG and CO, because they are fundamentally clashing with each other. There are just a few additional pointers you want to keep in mind. The first is on preemptive material. If POI engagement is sparse, you want to look to how the materials of OG can be compared against CO's contribution, i.e., does OG have pieces of framing or argumentation that CO don't inherently deal with, or does OG have a clear point of characterization that preemptively makes the CO case irrelevant? All of this has to do with making these observations and understanding how OG's case interacts with CO, because obviously it is very, very hard to evaluate a neutral perspective on the diagonal comparisons, because CO has every room to kind of explain to you why clearly OG looks bad, but you have to fight that perspective and balance it between, is CO right about trying to make OG look bad, or does OG actually have some degree of preemption that makes the attack look kind of weird? So that's one. evaluate and look at material that the top half team has given, which can preemptively engage with this. The second thing to do, if it's not about pure engagement, is to evaluate the strength of responses against the strength of arguments given by top half teams. I think this is the easiest way to evaluate diagonals. If the CEO response or the analytical extent of an extension that the closing teams gives, if the way you evaluate it does not matter compared to a top half's far more analytically dense contribution, then that's enough of a reason to believe why top half wins against closing opposition. However, if closing opposition gives enough responsive analysis to explain that the contribution of OG is wrong, obviously it should be credited for that response because, well, they made the response, they proved the response, it is a valid response, they should beat OG. I know it doesn't really sound fair because it's like, oh yeah, closing teams, they have an advantage because they can just beat opening teams. But that's kind of the nature of the game. Obviously, closing teams are going to speak later than opening. Obviously, closing teams have the advantage. So you should still give closing an equal amount of burden of standard apply the same standard and metrics to closing opposition in how they are able to analytically prove their engagement towards OG and assess if it's enough to beat the way that opening proves their points. So if closing opposition proves their points slightly better than opening, then yeah, closing wins. If opening still has far more analytically dense points that the extension in closing does not deal with, then the extension loses. Simple as that. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question. No, for the love of God, please don't be more harsh on closing benches. This is not okay, I'm not trying to be rude here, but there is a delicate balance in applying a strict regimen on closing benches without discrediting them. I think a lot of newbie judges and screw up both ends of the spectrum. Where on one hand, they're being too nice to closing teams because of recency bias. On the other hand, they fall too desperate in not wanting to go into recency bias that they end up screwing up the process of judging a closing team well. Just because a closing team has slightly more advantages does not mean you should apply a slightly more stringent standard on them. Judging diagonal comparisons is not about I'm being a bit more lenient to opening teams because obviously you don't have a chance to engage. Like, yeah, that is one principle, but you should not take that principle to the extreme and always give an opening team because you're always nice to top half team. It's all about evaluating what you can compare and comparing the levels of proof that is given when you are comparing both teams. It is often very easy to extrapolate a clash that happens between both diagonal teams and figure out how a team wins that clash without going into the way that without going into the kind of nitty-gritty of should I be a bit more restrictive on the closing team because opening didn't respond. Obviously, if it's really close, QI engagement becomes the tipping point. If opening teams don't offer a point, if closing teams don't get a point of information from opening when they give themselves the opportunity to engage, and there's a deadlock that doesn't really get resolved because closing extension is not enough, but OG's case is also not enough, then you can kind of facilitate the idea of point. Yeah. Another thing, the new World's Manual does update that closing teams don't necessarily have to weigh against opening as a win condition, because you should do the weighing yourself now, and it also applies to diagonal comparisons. If a closing team that responds to opening must not weigh their extension against opening, you still have to weigh their extension against opening. Of course, it doesn't mean you should be nice to closing and give them the benefit of the doubt that their weighing is correct because it came sooner, and they had the opportunity to respond to the OG's weighing. But you still have to evaluate how does the responsive weighing and how does the adaptability of this closing team engage to what has already been proven in top half debate. I think the conclusion here is don't be harsh on closing benches. That's bad judging. But have a balance. Be nice to opening teams in understanding that you can't have a chance to contribute and respond to CO, but also be nice to closing teams as well, because that is just the nature of the game. You cannot necessarily there's no way around this. That's how BP is developed. Closing teams will have the last say. That is how it's structurally designed to do so. You cannot penalize them for literally how the game is gone. It is about a balance of following what is basically what you already should have known about judging. When assessing diagonals, assess holistically. How does preemptive material engage? How does response work? Which weighing is more persuasive? What is left standing in the opening team that you can reasonably credit and compare against the closing team? Even if closing team has far more additional time and far more additional opportunity and more time to respond to opening, that's not necessarily mean you're giving them more benefit, but you are still wanting to make sure that they have the proper scrutiny. I think the best way to conclude this is that you should apply the same analytical burden, the same standard, consistent, apply the same consistent standard of evaluation across all teams. I hope that answers the question. So yeah, I think that's yeah, that's that question answered. Does anyone have any other questions? We have about 4 minutes left. In the meantime, I guess I will just kind of fix my camera issue while waiting for people to answer questions. Mm. Where do you think I'm likely to mess up as a trainee with no prior experience in BP edging? Firstly, is arbitrary justification. Don't justify. I think one of the worst ways anyone can justify is by justifying by saying, I think opening government has better points than opening opposition. Or, I think opening government sounded nicer than opening opposition. That is, again, bad judging. Don't do that judging. Even if you're a novice, that's not excusable. You will get tanked. And I think that's one of the easiest ways to screw up. You are not judging the debate as it happened. You are judging the debate on your own standards of what you think is good. You should judge the debate in a way where you're evaluating the arguments the team has given against another argument the team has given. If OG gives X argument and OO gives Y argument, judging is about explaining and evaluating. Does X argument be Y argument, and by extension, does that mean OG beats OO or vice versa? Yeah, and I think that's the most easiest step to mess up because people often don't realize how to justify. I think that's something as a trainee. I don't want to overload you with stuff. I think that's the most important thing you should focus on at first, especially if you're just starting out. Focus on just giving justifications which follow the rules of parliamentary judging and are justifications which make sense. Comparatives and rankings. Yeah, I did give a bunch of resources. I will give it again in the workshop. The workshop has some links. I will be sharing the links in the WhatsApp group, so don't worry about that. Cool. More questions. We have like 2 minutes. Happy to just kind of stay here and answer. Otherwise, we can just kind of wrap up if no one else has any questions. Okay.
Hi, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to type in the chat or ask Imran directly.
Yep, exactly what OC said.
Just to ask again and confirm, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up.
Yeah, I think that should be all. I don't think anyone has questions. It's already the 1 hour 30-minute mark.
So yeah, thanks guys. I know there's barely anyone in the Zoom now in the G Meet because everyone left already. I assume they're already done with the workshop. But to those who are still here, thank you very much for attending the workshop. I really, really hope this helped. Thank you to OC for facilitating and organizing this workshop as well. Very, very happy to help out. See you. Well, I would say see you all in people speak, but clearly you cannot see me, but you will see me spiritually, maybe. I don't know. Maybe OC can handle some way of me announcing breaks remotely. This is a half joke. I will be in Bali, so I will be free. Otherwise, jokes aside, thank you everyone. Hopefully, I helped. Hope you all have a great night. And yep.
Thank you so much, Imran, for that very insightful session. I hope everyone here found it equally insightful and had a great learning experience. Thank you so much for taking our time to attend this session. Thank you so much, Imran, for taking our time to take this session. Good night, guys.
All right. Bye bye. I will share everything in the WhatsApp group as well, so you guys can refer back to that.